Cindy Davis Evans of The Cindy Davis Show. My guest today is a leader, composer, and jazz musician and founder of Verve Jazz Ensemble, gaining notoriety with several albums reaching to the top 10 of the National Jazz Week chart. Joining me now is super talented Josh Feldstein.
Good. Nice to meet you. It's a pleasure.
It's a pleasure to meet you as well. Thank you for joining me.
I'm very happy to be here. Let me get myself all set up and we can have our discussion.
Okay, absolutely. Great.
You look lovely.
Thank you. So how are you today?
Well, today's a busy day. It's a Monday. There's plenty of things to catch up on from 4 days of being in New York City and unwinding from all of that. I'm a New Yorker, and I had a chance to take my 12-year-old son into the city for 4 days of mayhem, and so we're recovering from all of that now. But it was worth it.
Wow! So you've been doing jazz for a long time, over 30 years.
That's a true statement.
Yeah. How did it all get started?
Well, I began when I was just a boy, taking drum lessons growing up in New York. And I had no focus, Cindy, whatsoever in any specific art form. And one day, my drum instructor said to me, "You know, Josh, you sound like Gene Krupa." And I said to him, "I sound like Gene Krupa? You think I sound like Gene Krupa? That's unbelievable." Who's Gene Krupa? Gene Krupa was. So he said, "Okay, next week I will bring some records that are Krupa records." And he did. And they were on the Verve record label. So I saw this logo, Verve, on the records, and he played the music for me. And to be honest with you, Cindy, I didn't hear that I sounded like Gene Krupa, but he said I did, and I wasn't going to disagree with him. So what I found, though, was that I was captivated by Krupa's playing, and I really loved the music. He was playing with a trio, and then I started exploring what he did with the Benny Goodman big band, and then I got into big bands, and I started listening to Count Basie and Duke Ellington and Stan Kenton and Woody Herman, and it just went on and on and on. And as a drummer, I became enamored really with what all of the different drumming approaches that I heard were to playing with big bands. And as I got a little bit more sophisticated and I started listening more critically, I started to understand what these guys were doing, because at the beginning I didn't understand what I was listening to. It was music, and it was way over my head. Yeah. And as I began to understand it, I fell more and more in love with the music. And then I started to discover more of the smaller combo music. For example, Art Blakey. And Philly Joe Jones really hit me hard. I had a chance to see Blakey and the Jazz Messengers play at the Village Gate in the Village in New York when I was just a kid. Wow. And it changed my entire focus on music. That was it. Yeah. So having an opportunity to grow up listening to big band stuff, and then living in New York City and having a chance to listen to genius drummers like Art Blakey and Philly Joe and Joe Jones. Papa Joe Jones was still alive at the time. He was playing on 113th Street and Broadway at the place called the West End Cafe, and we used to go listening to Joe play with the Countsmen, a group of musicians that were former Count Basie alumni, and the group was headed by Joe Jones. And of course, listening to the Buddy Rich Big Band and having a chance to listen to, so many other greats, Elvin and so forth. I mean, you can just go on and on and on. The
Wow.
exposure, it basically captivated my complete musical attention, and it set me on the path of my own interests. So it's a long-winded answer, but there's so many great players to acknowledge. I have to touch on all of them.
Absolutely. Those are the shoulders that you stand on today, I would say.
Yes, very much
So
so.
for those for a lot of us who may not know a whole lot about jazz, can you tell us how we can distinguish between hard bop, bebop, swing, and contemporary jazz?
That's a great question. So if you listen to what we'll call early jazz, and this is for people who are learning a little bit more about the music, and you go back to the early swing era, or even the late 1920s, the Roaring Twenties,
Oh yeah.
jazz was about one thing, Cindy. It was about music for people to dance. It was the pop music of 90 or 100 years ago. That was the purpose of big bands, and that really was the main focus of what jazz was about back in the late 20s, the 30s, the 40s. It was about dancing. They called them dance bands for a reason, because people would get together and they would use this as their source of music to do a lot of dancing. This was the social activity of the era. And it became more evolved, it became more instrumental, it became more sophisticated, and it began to move from of a more of a dance-oriented pop. Very much was pop culture at the time, and that began to slowly evolve. And into the late 40s and early 50s, as the big band era really sort of started to taper down, and you started to develop more of what they called the bop era. And of course, the era was predominantly led by young, hip artists like Bird, Charlie Parker, and Dizzy Gillespie, and the music that they brought forward. This was the new music sounds that started coming out of the late 40s, early 50s, and that turned into something called bop, or bebop at the time. And that music was fast, it was furious, it was complex, it was really very dramatic, and it was quite different from the swing era and the dance band stuff of the 30s and early 40s. So now you started to see a sort of separation in terms of the legacy of the music. It started to evolve. And that led to an entire crop, an entire new generation of jazz artists that began to take the art form in a completely new direction. And at the same time, the remnants of the big band era sort of evolved into rock and roll. You had the emergence really of a steady 4/4 kind of a groove that people could snap their fingers to and continue to dance to, but that evolved into rock and roll, and that opened up an entire other genre of music, which we can talk about, but we're here to talk about jazz, so we'll stay moving in this direction. And so bebop challenged the listener on a completely different level, and it became a much headier, a much more esoteric and complex and demanding kind of a music. It was incredibly intense, and a lot of people really dug it. But many of the main rank and file listeners of the swing era, this created some challenges in terms of their ability to understand and sort of relate to this music. And so we start really seeing a change in the way people related to jazz at that time. And then as you move through the 50s, there were many greats. There's too many to mention, and I don't want to make this into a musicology class because that's going to bore everybody to pieces. But when Miles Davis brought his music and his concepts forward, there was an evolution from what we would call bebop to more of a cool bop or a hard bop. And that began to evolve into completely different strains of jazz. And again, another evolution really in terms of where the music was going. You then had players like Philly Joe Jones with Miles Davis, and later, a little later, the kind of the mid to late 50s, Art Blakey and the music that he played. There were many other evolutions of the sound. Elvin Jones started to really show a whole thread of playing and thinking in the early 60s. You had then the Brubeck quartet that brought jazz back into sort of, mainstream. You think of Take Five, which I think, along with Miles's Kind of Blue album, I think those are two of the most popular jazz albums that were ever released in terms of commercial interest. They are still probably today two of the top. But the Brubeck sound was very different from what Miles was doing and what the hard bop players were doing. And you move into the 60s and the music began to continue to evolve, and there was a waning really of interest in more straight ahead stuff and Afro-Cuban jazz and Latin jazz and bossa. And you think about Antonio Carlos Jobim and a lot of the Afro-Cuban stuff that Blakey played and that Elvin played in the middle 60s and later 60s. So you see, we can keep going, but the whole idea is that this art form is so evolutionary, and it continued to evolve in strains, and this is really the genius of jazz. It evolved into other forms of fusion, and you think about groups like Weather Report in the early to mid 70s, late 70s, and we could go on. But the idea,
the contemporary jazz, when did that?
This is the era where all of this really started to take root. Think about contemporary, and I would say that the Brecker Brothers and Weather Report and groups like that in the 70s were really responsible for creating what evolved really into contemporary jazz.
That's pretty much the genre that you fall under. Is you do it all though, really, right? But you are under the genre of contemporary jazz mainly?
Well, we are certainly a contemporary group, and we do play original compositions that have a far more contemporary base in terms of our legacy. But our roots, if you will, I would say are probably hard bop in terms of sort of the melody and the structure and the composition of our group. Back in the hard bop era, you think about Miles, or you think about the Blakey, for example. Rhythm section, piano, bass, drums, and then a couple of horns on the front, which is trumpet and tenor sax. We started with that type of structure. We have evolved now into a septet with a trombone and an alto, which also doubles as flute. So we're now a 7-piece group, but our core really is leaning, I would say, towards that hard bop era. But to your point, there's a lot of contemporary sound and rhythmic and harmonic and melodic structure that we have placed over that. And we also do a lot of stuff that's Latin and Afro-Cuban.
Wow. How do you choose your 7-piece ensemble?
Well, the answer is partly due to Tatum Greenblatt, our trumpet. Tatum has been with the Verve Jazz Ensemble since our first album, recorded in 2012. And
How did you meet? How did you meet?
Tatum was introduced to me through our pianist at the time, Matt Ostreicher. Matt was playing in a number of different groups, organizations in New York, and he and Tatum knew each other. And when we were thinking about recording our first album, Matt said, "There's a horn player from New York. This cat, I have to introduce you to Tatum. He's wonderful. He's a fabulous player. You're gonna really dig this guy's playing." And he was right.
Yeah.
And as we developed our musical relationship, after our first 5, I think it was our first 4 or 5 albums, I've lost track, as a quintet, we wanted to branch out. We felt that we were ready to sort of expand the sound of the Verve Jazz Ensemble.
Yeah.
And we did. And Tatum said, "I would want to introduce you to Alexa Tarantino," who is just an amazing alto saxophonist, and she doubles also on flute.
Oh.
And Willie Applewhite, who is just a great trombonist, New York trombonist, originally from Chicago. And so we brought Willie and Alexa in, and it rounded out the horn section to trumpet, tenor, alto, / flute, and trombone. And that became the front horn line of our group. And we recorded our album, I think it was 2018, Connect the Dots, with our 7-piece group, and it hit #1 on the Jazz Week radio charts. And so we said, okay, I think maybe we figured out that this is making some sense. We're going to stick with this formula, and we have.
Oh, well, congratulations on that.
Thank you.
Wow. You play the drums, of course. Are there any other instruments you play?
Well, none that I would record on a record. Let me put it to you that way.
Okay.
When I was younger, I played alto saxophone, and I got to a point where I played in high school, and I played some in college, but I never got to the point where I got over the edge where it became good enough. But
go ahead.
I was going to say, though, Cindy, it's an interesting question. Nobody ever asks me that question. But the one thing that has done for me as a drummer, and I'm serious when I talk about the alto saxophone here, is that I played a melodic instrument. I haven't just played a rhythmic percussive instrument.
Yeah.
So that's allowed me as a drummer to also hear as a melodic instrument performer. And that has, I think, helped me evolve some of my perception of appreciation and depth and so forth in terms of what I hear in the music.
Yeah.
As a band leader, I think it's been very, very helpful.
Wow, that's amazing. I'm sure that helps you with composing your albums and your music. What inspires your music? What inspires your albums? Like the title of your albums, like All in One, for example, the album that you got coming out in March. What inspired?
I think it's been pushed. I think it's been pushed now back to May.
Okay.
I think, but yes, it'll be coming out soon. All In is the title tune of the album, and that was due to the fact that on this particular record, we have 10 tracks, and we have 2 originals, and the other 8 are fabulous tunes that are written by some of the greats. We can talk a little bit about that. But the 2 that are originals were composed by Tatum Greenblatt, who is the executive producer of this particular album. And one of the tunes that he wrote is called All In.
Okay.
And we really dug that particular track. And I said, man, that's going to be the name of the album, All In.
Wow.
And I think it represents really sort of the vibe of the band in terms of the brotherhood, sisterhood that we have as instrumentalists. We've played together, Cindy, for such a long time that we really understand each other's performance strengths. And when we get together as a group, we're not feeling things out. We know where things are going to go, and we understand the way songs are structured and who's going to step into what space and how it all fits and works together. And we're all in as a group in that sense. And I just really felt strongly that captured a lot of the vibe, the intensity of the Verve Jazz Ensemble.
Y'all have been together for so long. Tell me some funny stories. Something that happened that really sticks out in your mind. Something interesting or funny.
Well, we have one trio album, okay? So over the course of our however many, eight albums that we've released, I believe our fourth album was a trio album, Swing-A-Nova. Well, why would we do a trio album when we're a quintet or later a septet? And the answer is that our tenor saxophonist, John Blank, decided about 2 weeks before our record date, he was going to go skiing and he was going to work on some stuff while he was skiing. And maybe you can see where the story is going. Anyway, John fell while he was skiing and busted his clavicle.
Oh,
I mean, it was not good. He busted his clavicle. And as a result, he wasn't playing anything. So there went the record date. We couldn't rewrite all of the charts as quartet charts. We were locked into all the quintet stuff. We'd spent a year working on it. Yeah. So the whole album, boom. So that went, completely upside down. And I said, well, what are we going to do now, fellas?
Wow.
So I decided sort of spontaneously, let's make this a rhythm section. Let's focus on the rhythm section. We'll do a trio album. We rather spontaneously put together a trio album, and it was called Swing-A-Nova, and it was very well received. I think it also went top 10. So there you have it.
It worked out for you, and it worked out for you in the end.
We got lucky.
Yeah, I say you were blessed. What? Who are some of the artists that, let's say, a wish list of people that you may wish to play with?
Wow, wish to play with? Oh my goodness. Living or dead. It could be any.
It could be either or. Yeah.
Well, okay, so as a drummer, I'm going to answer the question, as a drummer. And I think that it would be absolutely unbelievable if I had an opportunity to play with the Count Basie Big Band. That would have been a ride that would have been well worth taking. I listened to the Basie band of the 50s and 60s. I had a chance to see Count Basie's big band perform live on a couple of occasions. Wow! And I was
I can't even imagine that. Really?
The amount of energy that band put out was absolutely crazy. It would have been pretty amazing to have a chance to sit in with the Jazz Messengers if Art needed somebody to fill in his chair. Would have enjoyed playing very much with his group. The Messengers stuff from the late 50s and 60s was just absolutely incredible. Brubeck's stuff it was and is absolutely crazy. Dave Brubeck, and I was very fortunate to have an opportunity to take a master class with Dave Brubeck's drummer the legendary Joe Morello.
Wow.
And, Joe was the one of the instructors of John Riley, and John has been my drum instructor now for more than 10 years. Still studying with John, where we both have time to connect and work on things. John is the drummer for the Village Vanguard Orchestra, formerly run by Mel Lewis, the great Mel Lewis. They play every Monday night at the Village Vanguard in New York City in the Village. And John is also, in addition to being an incredible drummer, also an instructor at the Manhattan School of Music in Harlem. And the quartet, the Brubeck Quartet, absolutely tremendous. I would also have loved to have had a chance to play with Red Garland, the pianist, Red Garland. I love listening to Red's piano. I could listen to 10 hours a day of Red Garland, and he played with the great Art Taylor on drums, and listening to A.T., they used to call him A.T., Art Taylor, and Red Garland, unbelievable. So those are a few. I could go on, but those are some.
Well, I want to congratulate you on all of your success and your, reaching your top 10 on the National Jazz Week chart and your upcoming music. What can your audience expect on this album that's coming up, All In?
This is an album that focuses on mid-century Americana music. And this is something that I hope your listeners will enjoy. We have a number of selections from the late 50s, mid to late 50s, all the way through the 70s.
Wow.
And we sort of focused on that time frame. One of them is a tune entitled The Theme from The Odd Couple. And for those of you guys who are old enough to remember The Odd Couple, it was a television show. Okay, good. I'm glad I'm not the only older person here.
Okay.
We did a sort of an Afro-Cuban rendition of the theme from The Odd Couple. We did it's a 6/8 Afro-Cuban thing that also has straight ahead sections, and we had fun with it. I mean, it was really meant to be a fun song. The original theme came out of the movie with Jack Lemmon and Walter Matthau, and then later the television series, and that was with Tony Randall and Jack Klugman, I think. So we did that. That's kind of off the wall. But we also have more serious works. We have a piece that was written by Toshiko Akiyoshi from the late 70s called Studio J, which is a big band reduction. She had a big band that recorded that with Lou Tabakin, and we took her 18-piece big band and reduced it down to a 7-piece Verve jazz ensemble rendition. We have a couple of great tunes from the prolific pen of Neil Hefti. Hefti wrote the Odd Couple theme. He also wrote Pensive Miss, a beautiful, beautiful melody that the Count Basie Orchestra played back in the late 50s.
Wow.
So there's a wide range of music, including something from George Shearing, a beautiful tune called Midnight in the Air. So we've got some Latin tunes, we've got some reimagined, fun things from television and the movies. We have more serious works from some of the legendary composers of that era. So the album really tries to address mid-century Americana in terms of the Verve Jazz Ensemble's take on the music.
Awesome. Sounds like it's a variety of something for everybody. So I'm looking forward to it. I want to thank you so much for coming on again and and talking about your career and educating us about a lot of the history of the jazz. It's been fun. It's been
Thank you
great.
so much. It's been wonderful to be here. And I want to just conclude by saying that jazz is really the only original American art form.
Yeah.
And we want to bring the richness of this art form, which really stands on the shoulders of the African American community, and
Mm-hmm.
so many fabulous artists over the decades, and bring it back into the mainstream, because there's so much richness in this fabulous music.
Yeah.
So we really feel a passion to bring this forward, and it's really a mission, a sort of vision that we have to bring this to life as much as we possibly can, and open it up to as many listeners and ears as possible.
Well, I think you've done that, and much success on everything that you're doing and going forward in the future.
Thank you very, very much. Thanks for having me. It's been my pleasure.
Thank you.